Welcome to Fossil Creek Tree Farmer Nursery. Today we're going to be talking about potatoes. And first question is when? Well, now. Basically the month of February is the time, and you're thinking it may be cold. Well, you can plant them. They sprout. If the new sprout were to get a little nipped by a freeze, it's not a big deal. They'll rebound. So you get them in the ground. It will take about 90 to 120 days to do a crop. And around here, soil preparation is important since we have heavy clay soils and they prefer to have decent drainage. So a good idea to use planter's mix to mix into the soil. You make a mound about 10 or 12 inches tall, and that will be where you plant them. And you could also do them in raised beds. If you are doing a raised bed, it's good for that to be at least 10 or 12 inches deep. And you could also do them in pots. In raised beds or pots, you kind of get around the problem that we have pretty heavy clay soils. But if you amend the soil with planter's mix, you know, they'll still do well in soils. And the mound will be 12 inches wide, and you'll be planting down the center of it. If you're getting really enthused and you're doing multiple rows, your rows for the potatoes would be 36 inches apart. The individual potatoes that you're planting would be 8 to 16 inches apart in the row. You'll do a 6-inch little trough, put the potato piece in it, and then cover it up with 2 or 3 inches of soil. Potatoes are fairly heavy feeders, so it's a good idea to fertilize it when you plant them, and then again when the plants come up about 4 to 6 inches. You can use, and that'll be 1/3 of a cup for a 10-foot row, and you can use either a organic fertilizer like this one, a 573 organic, or if you have some of the K8 around that you might use on your yard, it's a 15-5-10. You know, that would work also. Of course, that's a synthetic, and the Happy Frog is an organic. And you would do that down either side of your potato pieces, kind of like 4 inches on either side of where you put the potato in. And there's 2 schools of thought on how you plant them. You can cut them up, and you would want to have 2 to 3 eyes. And right now the eyes are not actually eyes, they just look like little dimples. You could cut a potato like this up into 4 pieces before you plant it. If you do that, you want to leave them on a shelf or someplace cool and dry, and let them callus over for several days. You don't want to cut it and then put it in the moist soil, because then it would probably just proceed to rot. So let it dry up and get a callus. Or you can do it the way I have done it, and that is I just put a whole potato in there. And of course, if you do that on your spacing 8 to 16 inches apart, you would probably, if you're putting whole potatoes in there, you'd be doing them 16 inches apart, because they're going to be initially and down the road a kind of a bigger plant. When they get to about 10 inches tall, you'll be pulling some of the soil in onto the plant. And as far as how much soil you're going to put on it, it's over time you're going to do that multiple times. But the key thing to remember is where that seed potato or piece is in the soil, all of your potatoes that the plant's going to make are going to be above your seed piece. Because as you pull that soil up onto the plant, the potatoes actually develop from on the stems of the plant. So you have to have built up some depth of soil above the seed piece, because that's the only place that potatoes are going to be made. It can root down below that, but it won't make any potatoes down below. So that gives you an idea of the process. And as it puts on potatoes, you want to make sure that the potatoes stay covered, because if they were to form and be up on on the surface and get sunlight on them, they'll turn green, which is a no-no. So you want them to remain covered by soil or mulch. And just as a note, later, if you had potatoes that have some green on them, when you cook them, you're going to cut the green off. But the ideal is to not to have the green to begin with. Get sunlight as long as possible. All day long is fine. They will never suffer from an excess of sunlight. And then as they grow, you can harvest new potatoes, which are just basically immature, and you do that. You can start doing that with just reaching in with your hand and pulling them out. And you can start doing that when the plant blooms. And then to harvest the potatoes when it's mature, you'll be doing that when the plant fades, begins to die. That means it's over. And at that point, you dig them, obviously, from underneath, and be gentle. You don't want to bruise them or cut them, because that would be one that you would have to be eating pretty quick, because once they suffer an injury, they tend to decline. Problems that you could encounter: we got some bugs like Colorado potato beetles, flea beetles, aphids, wireworms, and slugs. And of course, there is an organic poison out for slugs right now that would take care of those that you can use. And then the funguses, possible to get a blight or a fungus. And of course, like most plants, they like a moderate level of soil moisture. You don't want to let them dry out. Of course, if that were to begin to happen, they're relatives of tomatoes, and when they get a little dry, they're going to wilt. So that's what you want to avoid. But you don't want to keep them soggy, because then you're inclined to have soil funguses be a problem. And of course, if you were to get blights early on, you can pick the leaves. An organic approach: you just pick the bad leaves, don't put them in the compost pile, put them in the trash and get rid of them. It'll be one of the earliest things that you plant. So as far as companions, we talked last week about onions. Those are good companions, so you can plant your potatoes in the vicinity of onions. They get along. The main thing that you don't want to plant or put it where you're going to have tomatoes in the future. You don't want tomatoes and potatoes together, because they're both members of the nightshade family. They have the same pests, blights and things like that. So if you have an area where you've got your heart set on planting tomatoes, don't put potatoes in that vicinity. But there's a long list of plants that are friendly and good companions for potatoes. So here it is. Listen quick. Basil, beans, beets, corn, eggplant, horseradish, nasturtiums, peas, squash, and brassicas. And of course, if that threw you a curve, brassicas is a group that includes cabbage, kale, collards, radishes, turnips, broccoli, and Brussels sprouts. And as far as neat companions, I was kind of surprised to learn that radishes are in that group, but it's a great companion plant, because the time to plant radishes from seed is basically early February through the whole month into early March. And the thing about radishes is it's going to take your potatoes a while to get underway. Radishes can go from a seed to you're eating a radish in 25 to 30 days. So you could plant them around the potatoes, and by the time the potatoes are really getting underway, you're going to be eating radishes. And of course, you pull the whole plant when you do that. So when the potato needs some space, the radishes are going to be gone. So it's a natural companion plant. Some of the other few plants that are not good companions for potatoes, we've already mentioned tomatoes, cucumbers, sunflowers, pumpkins. You don't have to cut them if you don't want to, again. And as far as the soil is concerned, as it grows, you just kind of keep pulling in the soil around them, because that's where the potatoes are going to be. So I think we got it covered. Thanks for tuning in.